started to read the propaganda book that you had recommended on your channel,
Hmm.
um, and somewhere in there he talks about how what maybe the most prevalent form of propaganda is not the propaganda that's meant to stir people up to action, but the propaganda that's there to subdue people and keep people passive.
Right.
And that seems like that's taking a lot of forms, um, and that's where I saw a lot of these kind of conspiratorial people end up, because they're so convinced that if they say anything or do anything, like the government's going to show up at their doorstep.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Byrne Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia on a beautiful early autumn day. And today we're going to have another in our Anadromous dialogues. We'll be talking to a guy named Michael Sartori from Texas. And actually it was Jacob Federecci who I had done a discussion with him on his channel, and he recently got in touch with me and said, you should talk to Michael. And I said, okay. And I hadn't really spent much time. I hadn't seen him. I think I'd run into him once before on an interview. But why don't we just go ahead and get into that? Before we do, you can subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Well, maybe you already have. Well, just hit like. Help the algorithms find other people. I think that's the main point. Hit like, algorithms are happy. You can also comment, which is important. And what else? Ooh, if you feel like it, you could contribute some money. There is a link below in the description. And for those who follow the rules below, you could get some extras. Just a hint. Meanwhile, let's go to Texas. Right. You're in your car. You're doing one of those.
Yeah. Well, yes, I have more flexibility. I work in construction, so it's easier for me to work around things on the road than finding time at home with little kids running around. So
I get it. So tell me a little bit about yourself. I don't know too much. You're living in Texas.
Yeah.
Where?
So San Antonio.
Right.
So I found out about this little corner because of, well, you were the first person I found out about.
Uh-huh.
I searched on YouTube for Jordan Peterson and Francis Schaeffer.
Okay.
And so I saw your talk with Paul, and I had a conversation with Paul a while ago, Rando's conversation. I've been, so, I learned about Francis Schaeffer from my parents.
Mm-hmm.
They were about your age, kind of both converted in kind of dramatic ways a little bit in the 70s. And my mom had shown my siblings and I the How Should We Then Live video when I was a teenager, as part of our homeschooling.
Right.
And I just kind of not.
How old are you now?
38.
Okay. That just helps me to figure out where you are. So
yeah, so so that was just something that was in the back of my mind, like, yeah, that really really makes sense of history, and I hadn't really thought about it, and then I came across it again a couple years ago, and it really helped me to sort through just some of the crazy stuff that's been going on in our world lately.
right.
And I'd started listening to Jordan Peterson a little bit. I was getting a little frustrated because I felt like, oh, he's talking about these philosophers, and Schaeffer dealt with a lot of the people that he was kind of dealing with, and
Right.
it just that kind of the smart intellectual evangelical Christian kind of thought is the kind of been missing from Jordan's interactions, I think. So yeah, so I searched for that and I found your talk with Paul, and then decided, well, if he can do videos with no editing and nothing, I can start doing it too. So I just kind of been started doing things. Just I had formerly worked for a church, did some youth ministry and things, and now I don't really have as much of it is a creative outlet or as much of an outlet to give back. But so I just started doing videos as kind of, well, let's just see this, and I could do whatever I want. So it's just kind of seeing the path that it takes me. So
what kind of Christian background did you grow up in? What were they connected?
So my parents are pretty much Reformed. And when my dad was he became pastor of a congregational church, kind of through a strange series of events. It was a very small church, and the pastor left, and my dad took over just in an interim position. He didn't go to seminary, but he had a master's of education, and he'd been studying the Bible, and very much of the kind of the evangelical mindset that anybody can study the Bible and learn, and he was a good teacher. So he did that for an interim thing, but he ended up staying for about 25 years.
That's a few years.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, it was interesting. So when he and my mom were in college, they had a little Christian fellowship group. This was in Massachusetts. That's where I grew up. And Tim Keller actually came while he was in seminary at Gordon Conwell.
Right.
He came and helped them set up their little campus group, and got them affiliated with I can't remember one of the big groups, but I don't remember which one it was. But so that was kind of their theological background. But I also started going to a Pentecostal church when I was in high school through their youth group, and I actually started working there. And I worked there for like 10 years or so. So it was very different theological kind of mindset. But
yeah, I know it pretty
well.
Helped.
Yeah, but it helped me to see that, we're not all so different, which is kind of the fun thing about what I think is going on with the internet and YouTube and all that. So yeah, and then moved down to Texas for my whole family basically ended up moving here. So it was a good time for a little life reset. But my wife is actually working. She works full time for a church as a children's pastor, and I'm just paying the bills. So it gives me a lot of time to listen to interesting things. And after a while, I feel like I just got to say something. So I started making videos too. So.
Well, I'm sorry. Some of my videos force you to look.
Yeah.
and so some of them are good for listening. So yeah. But it was Jacob that suggested we talk to each other, and I'm not sure exactly what he was seeing. He kind of said, you just really need to talk to him. But I'm glad to talk. And I'm just trying to locate you a bit here on where you are. What have you, so was it you evidently you started saying, where are we, what's going on, And
Yeah.
then sort of discovered, I'm guessing Jordan Peterson, some other YouTube stuff, found the conversation with Paul and myself, and then things opened up into more
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, around around the start of the pandemic and all that, I started kind of um taking stock, and I kind of went down a little bit of the conspiratorial rabbit holes and stuff, and that's a pretty useless term, I think, at this point, because the range of things that it can describe, you know
Almost
the
everything.
difference between, yeah, between the mainstream media that just wants to pretend that they have all the answers, and everything is great and fine, and you
Right.
just need to listen and obey, to the super crazy stuff. So I kind of went down that, and I'm an open person, and I think that what I because of the upbringing that I had, my parents were never trying to hide information from us, uh,
Right.
you know um, and I certainly know the Bible teaches there is evil in this world, and it takes a lot of forms, and most of it is in the form of deception and manipulation. Um, but so I kind of went down that kind of thing for a while, and then ultimately what I realized is all these people, um, they don't have any like rock bottom for where they can hit with their like um, like what's going to happen. And I realized at some point, well, okay, at some point I realized there's a lot of things that are outside of my control. I just need to trust in God. And um, I actually really started to read the propaganda book that you had recommended on your channel,
Hmm.
um, and somewhere in there he talks about how what maybe the most prevalent form of propaganda is not the propaganda that's meant to stir people up to action, but the propaganda that's there to subdue people and keep people passive.
Right.
And that seems like that's taking a lot of forms, um and that's where I saw a lot of these kind of conspiratorial people end up, because they're so convinced that if they say anything or do anything, like the government's going to show up at their doorstep. And I said, well, I think the real answer is the gospel. So I'll just say that, and I won't be afraid of talking about that. If you keep your your criticisms of the government, and the secret powers that are behind closed doors, if your critique of them is based out of the Bible, and that this is how Christians should act, and then I feel God's going to protect me. Or whatever consequences I suffer, it's part of His will. So and that kind of turned things around for me, because I realized, at a certain point, all of these different messages, they conflict with each other, but they have the same effect of keeping people scared or inactive, or not getting on with anything, not doing anything with their life. And even within the church, because the people that are convinced, this is the end of the world, and the rapture is coming, and all that stuff, and it should make them be evangelistic, but they're more or less hiding in their basements.
Right.
That's kind of the same thing. So,
Yeah. Well,
so yeah,
what I've been seeing is that, and I've mentioned this in different places, but that the whole problem with this, people will sometimes leave comments for me, or I'll see them in other places where it's kind of like, yeah, but what about fill in the blank, some major thing that's controlling everything? What about that? You've forgotten about that. To which I'm saying, "Now, you don't understand. If you believe that there's some, and like I say, it's often just fill in the blank. If you can
yeah,
put Jews or the Catholics or the Freemasons or the Democrats or the Republicans or the Russians or anybody into that, and they're controlling everything.
Yeah.
And there's this thing called the parallax view where each of our eyes looks differently at something. So if you close one eye, you'll see things slightly differently than looking out the other, which gives us stereoscopic vision. But often these things are like a parallax view of the world. It's like the world is still there, but you're just looking through this one eye, and in this one eye, everything is being controlled by X. And whenever I hear these people talk, what I always hear is fatalism, despair. I hear they have no answer. Their faith is in no faith. They simply are stuck somewhere where, and yet they feel like they understand things better than everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
There was a comedian once, Eric Bogosian, back in the 80s. He did a routine where he says he was doing this one guy. He says, "Yeah, I know what's happening," and he was running it all down. And he says like, "And the government's doing this and this and this," and he goes like, "It's a secret, but I know about it." You know, and that's how people often are. They're proud. They know what's really happening. And to which my thought is, I do quite a bit of reading. I do, I was just thinking the other day, I started, what was it? Reading Solzhenitsyn in 1975. I've been thinking about a lot of things for a long time. And I would never claim to know what these people know. To me, the world is so complicated. And we don't know where we are right now. And that's one of the things. Yeah. So even, people will say, well, it's all going to turn into, and then they have some kind of woke apocalypse, or they have some sort of, AI version of total control or something. And I'm going like, really? I've got my money placed more on chaos. I've got because I think that we don't know where we're going at this moment. In the last few years, all the political chaos of the time right before Trump, not Trump, but during the Trump time, but the time right before COVID. And then the chaos that's happened since then. And the fact that, right now, we don't know what's going to happen with Europe during this winter at all. If there's a heavy, heavy winter, we're going to see some stuff we've never seen in our lifetime. And that nobody in Europe has seen in their lifetime in terms of economic hardship, people getting really cold, all of this sort of stuff, prices going really expensive. So, and we don't know what's happening in America as much as people would say, well, they're losing or they're winning or I'm going like, it's up in the air. So to me, that doesn't change anything. Things are always up in the air. And I think that what we've got now is a situation where we tread carefully. At the same time, there's good possibilities here that weren't here a few years ago. And if you'd asked me what are the possibilities in, say, 2012, I would have looked at you and said, oh, I don't know. I don't see that many really great possibilities. Whereas now, because of, for instance, some of the conversations we're having online with different kinds of people, that's the important thing. Like you were saying, many different kinds of Christians often have they're very different, and yet there is a commonality. And but it's not just Christians. It's, you've dropped me. It's not just Christians. It's also, I've been looking at all the people who are kind of saying, wait a minute, what's going on? Where are we being taken? And it is atheists, and it's Buddhists, and it's Hindus, and it's gay people, and it's it's just like all these different kinds of people are saying, where are we being dragged to? And I think that there is something there which could become something good, and that is a way of talking and disagreeing. Without what we see now is you disagree with certain people about certain things, and it's just poison. The person looks at you like you are whatever their version of the Antichrist is. And I think that's a good thing. How do you see it?
I think that's really similar to, what I'm seeing overall. I mean, I think because, the scary messages, once you view it through the lens of, okay, people are seeing something really scary and it's just causing them to do nothing. So that might be as much of the goal as there is for that. Um, but like I do see a lot of this change that is like there's so many of these channels um, like the gospel simplicity and a lot of the ones in our channel where it's all like
Yeah, I remember.
Protestants
Yeah,
working with Catholics and working with the Orthodox and people exchanging views and understanding things and you know at this at this point and we can still say from our viewpoint, well, this is the problem with their view, but I understand why they think that way, and I can tell that they still really love the Lord. And so as there's this the unity um, of the church, I think, is increasing, but it's not becoming monolithic. It is being united, um, while still remaining in these separate little things. And I never saw that as a bad thing. That's kind of one of the perspective that because I tend to be more in the Christian sphere of things. I would
right.
say like my some of my intention with my channel and what I would like to see more is, you know, many of the people who are who have like deconverted or whatever, and then they're deconstructed their faith and then they're coming back into it maybe through Jordan Peterson or something. There's kind of just this whole like, let's just write off normal average evangelical United States churches, and it's still a massive thing. Not in every part of the country, but like here in Texas and most of the South and in a lot of places,
Mm-hmm.
there's still a lot of churches with a lot of big people, and and we highlight the worst examples of kind of the cheesy stuff they do.
Right.
But I think those people need to get a little bit more aware of, hey, there's like these good discussions that are going on here, because I think that there is more capability for them to engage. It's just a lot of the intellectual power in like evangelicalism is still focused on more of the traditional apologetics and things like that,
Right.
instead of this kind of more esoteric
Well,
way of looking at
yeah, I'm
things.
not so much into it as esoterica as much as I am reality. That is to say,
Yeah,
part of it is that what Christians have done is they have, see, in a place like Texas, you still have enough Christians there where
yeah,
the Christians can kind of deceive themselves into thinking we're strong.
hmm,
We're good, our church is growing, whatever, these kinds of metrics. But what they don't understand, it's like a few years ago, people were saying, it's just a few of those crazy people in universities who are,
yeah,
girls who are dyeing their hair blue and people who want, what's this whole gender fluid thing? And no one was talking much about it. And people would say, so we don't need to worry about that. And eventually have been finding out we kind of do need to worry about that because something is going on that's very different than ever happened before.
yeah,
So I think that one of the problems with evangelical Christianity in America is they have no language for dealing with contemporary problems. And I think this is something Schaeffer was trying to address. And
hmm,
he wasn't completely successful at it because I think at the end he was pulled by his son towards communicating through video. And like the first documentary, I think is very good. The next one, I can see propaganda elements, which were coming straight from his son. And there were a couple of other videos that came out. And it wasn't, to me, they were better the funkier they were because
yeah,
there's something human in just doing this. And if it was a production, not that you can't have a nice conversation in a room with good lighting and good cameras. But nevertheless, what tells me this is happening on reality on some level is that, when it comes to presentation, we're not making ourselves look particularly good. We're not trying to be, you're sitting in a car and I'm sitting in a room. It's not a bad room, but it's not my camera isn't very good. It's like your camera's better than mine. Your camera's better than mine. But it seems real to me. And I think we're developing a language, and it's a language that always has to change as the situation changes. But what I've seen is that, for instance, Christians will often talk about evangelizing. I grew up and they were always talking about evangelizing Africa, evangelizing South America, evangelizing some island in the South Pacific, these kinds of things. And they would go through all sorts of, people who went to be missionaries to these places would go through all sorts of training. And one of the most important things was to train to learn the language, of course, because you can't do anything if you don't learn the language. But before then, you need to know a little bit about the people. If I go into a tribe in the middle of the Amazon, are they going to shoot me full of poison darts before I can speak? And the point is, with many of these tribes, for instance, and this has been something in Christianity for at least 150 years. They realized, okay, we can't go in there as the outsider. We have to come in and spend time with them. It's not a top-down message. First, you have to learn the language. But then you may learn the language, but there are cultures in this world where if you just say Jesus died for your sins, they don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't connect, just because not only do you not know, you have to learn the language. And once you've learned the language, then you have to learn their mythology.
Yeah.
You have to learn what motivates them. And, why is a tribe acting the way it's acting? Why are a group of people acting the way they are? You have to learn that, because prior to knowing that, you can't enter into a dialogue with them. And finally, the classic example was from this book called Peace Child.
I've read it before.
Yeah, where in order to communicate with these people, it was in the Solomon Islands or New Guinea, I think. And in order to communicate with them, and there were some pretty serious tribal people here who had some pretty serious customs, but they couldn't communicate, because even though they knew the mythology, they couldn't see a way to have the discussion until they asked, because these tribes in New Guinea tend to be fighting each other all the time, until they say, well, what would stop the battle between you? And then they would say, well, the tribe that was offended has to give their child to the other tribe to be raised or killed or whatever. And, you can just say, well, what do you mean the tribe that was offended? And they're always going back and forth. So in other words, someone has to give up their child. And as soon as the missionaries heard that, they said, that's what God did for us.
Yeah.
God was the offended party. He gave us his child. And suddenly they were in. They had a conversation. Now, we will spend all the time as missionaries to learn that kind of thing. But we won't spend the same time with our own people who have radically changed as far as outlook on life since the 1960s. They were changing before then, but the 1960s was like, fuel injection. So it's like, and you're going. And then everything started to change, and everyone's, people will say things like, I'm a pagan. And I'm sitting there going like, no, you're not. And the reason you're not is because you're not sacrificing animals outside. You don't really believe that the world is the way that these older pagan tribes believed it was. But what you're doing is you're trying to just conjure up something new. So then there are churches, and they tend to be these larger churches, which just want to kind of bring people in and comfort them and give them music that makes them feel good, and kind of envelop them. Like, we're just going to love you, but we've got this program for you and that program, and you're going to work with them. And I think that we still haven't actually learned. This is what I tried to do in my How We Got Here series, was to say, do you really want to communicate with these people? you need to know where this is all coming from so that you have something intelligent to say, and not just, a quick, Jesus loves you and God wants to take care of you. And by the way, all this is wrong. Because if they don't know, it's just like this tribe that was fighting each other, and I believe they were cannibals, if I remember the story.
Yeah.
You can't just,
I think they said
yeah.
they when they read the gospel, they thought Judas was the hero. I
Mhm.
remember that. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
try talking to the Mongols back in the 12th century, as they're coming across, and Genghis Khan says, what gives us joy is to see a village in fire and ruins, and the women raped and impregnated, and the children crying and whatnot. It's like, how are you going to talk to that person? You first have to learn why are you doing this? What is motivating you? And I
Yeah.
think that's what we need just as Christians to communicate. But I also think we need to encourage everybody to talk again, and
Mhm.
not to be afraid of disagreement. Because if people can't talk, then there can't be those discussions. And I think even if a person doesn't become a Christian, they need to first be able to talk. And so that's what I guess my work moves towards.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's so much like that we're just starting to figure out. Um, you know, there's like one thing that kind of made me excited when I listened to Jordan Peterson's biblical series is that, and this is like the most kind of Protestant way of thinking about things or whatever. But he's approaching it. He's already an expert in one area of psychology, so he knows how to discover truth through what he knows about psychology. And I don't say he gets necessarily all the details about the mythological stuff perfect, but when you listen to those lectures, he keeps talking about the interactions between the people, and he says that's just so right. It's so right. And because he's recognizing that in the story of the Bible there is that it's true, and he already knows how to verify if something is true through one system of expertise. And I think because there's been so much kind of battles between different factions in Christianity about how to interpret the Bible. The tendency for most leaders is to kind of steer people towards a safe course of of study, but in reality, I think that there will be lots of bad interpretations, but the more people approach it that way, there is still like more things to be discovered. We don't know, and the more that we learn about the world and we see what God's revealed through history and through the scripture, the more we can read into it. That's the thing people always say is bad, like what do you call it, like concordance, trying to um, fit modern things or what that we know. But we have to assume, at least as far as like the people interacting in those stories and the things that were told, they were still real people and they interacted in real ways. So if we know more about what motivates human behavior, and even when we learn more about like how the brain works and these things, like if it's true, if these stories are true, then those new discoveries will verify that, or it will it's not going to contradict. And so I think that it's hard for people like this is the problem I see, is that churches will not get up there and say here's a really new novel way to interpret the Bible, but that new novel way could bring people into the church, or it could reach people that you're never going to reach in the traditional means. So I think that
it's having the language to be able to communicate with them, and also to realize that if you say certain things, which to you sound absolutely standard, you might set them off because, and I often think it's because we're working on propagandas in our head. And if I say if I just go abortion, someone will just go,
Yeah.
if I say, LGBT, a person, they'll immediately have stuff that these little words will explode in their brain and start
Yeah.
making them act a certain way. So language. I was just thinking, Paul is making an attempt to find new language. I don't know if all the Vervaeke concepts and such that he does use communicate outside of this conversation we've been having. That is to say, I couldn't walk up to someone and say, relevance realization, and have them get it. They would just hear it as like, yeah, I realize that things are relevant or whatever. They wouldn't hear the kinds of things we might hear in those conversations. It's the same with Jonathan Peugeot's symbolic language. I think one of the things that we have to do, and I learned this with Francis Schaeffer, one of the things I noticed when I was at L'Abri the first time in 1978, 79, was that there were certain people who would come there who would learn all the language. So Francis Schaeffer would talk about the upstairs and the downstairs, or he would talk about true truth to distinguish it from whatever your personal truth was, which wasn't a phrase at the time, but it was going to be. And he had all these other phrases. And I remember people who would use these words. And then I said to myself, I can't use these words to discuss this stuff with anyone outside of L'Abri, hasn't read Francis Schaeffer's books. So I learned at that time how important it was to be able to put words from someone else into your own language, to find the way, for instance, to understand the concepts well enough that you could turn and describe them to someone else using different language. Now, that may mean you misinterpret them, but to me, when I go through life, I meet quite a few people who don't understand much philosophical language, don't understand much religious language, don't understand, they're running on different tracks. So maybe their whole thing is all the media they've been consuming. So they're, 1 minute they're talking about Game of Thrones, the next minute they're talking about Star Wars, or they're talking about video games. And there are all these languages for talking about these things. Now, it depends on who your friends are. My feeling is if I have a friend who's becoming a good friend and they are involved in this world, I should know a little bit about it so I can talk to them. For the same reason that the people in the Peace Tribe book needed to learn in order to communicate anything with the other people, lest they become lunch for not understanding the language and the mythology and what's motivating people. David Rockefeller made this mistake when he went to Papua New Guinea to the Dani tribe, and they were hardcore cannibals. And he was coming there, Rockefeller had tons of money. And what he was doing was sending home what are called mortuary poles, these elaborately carved poles out of a certain tree, I think in the mangrove swamps. And they started making a special pole for him. And what they didn't realize, mortuary means death. What he didn't realize was they were making that pole to kill him. And he was just coming there as a representative of the Metropolitan Museum or something like that. What he didn't realize is he'd stepped into the middle of a blood feud that they had with the Dutch who owned that part of the island at the time in the early 60s. Mm-hmm. And they looked at him, saw that he was a white guy and said, okay, well, if we get him, we'll be even again with our vendettas and our revenge cycle. So they said, we'll start making this. So he didn't understand that at all. And eventually, no one knows what happened, but we're pretty sure that he got killed and eaten as part of the revenge cycle. So it's important, for instance, how do you communicate with someone like, the Portland Antifa people who just seem completely irrational and will scream at people or throw rocks at people and such. That is a difficult challenge. And I don't know the answer to that because that is so extreme. Nevertheless, they are human beings. They are people that God made. How do we talk? I mean, just literally, how do we talk? So you have to find a way. If I was living there, I would say, and if I came in contact with these people, I would say, okay, what are they actually talking about? Like, and obviously, I'm not going to join them for their protests because those things get violent, and that's not the point. The point is not to agree with them. The point is to just have human conversation. And I think that's what the church needs to understand. But it's also what we need to encourage people who aren't Christians at all to understand as well. That they need to understand that we're coming from something, you know.
Yeah, the one thing I do remember from, I can't remember if it's from the videos or from the book or whatever, but Schaefer talked about, you know, that like the rejection of antithesis, it sounds good to like the existential philosophy types and stuff, and I think you can apply the same thing to the postmodern you know, way of going, but there's just, you can't escape it like within your head even, or there's just some things that you have to approach some aspects of life the same way that everybody else does. You know, if you can't like drive a car in a postmodern fashion without killing yourself, you know.
Right.
So I think that, I mean, yeah, it's probably hard during the middle of the riots may not be the best time to reach him, but when all those people go home, they still have to do a whole lot of normal things that everybody else does, and you know, so there has to be room for connection, and I do think that, you know, I don't know, the creating of new vocabulary and new languages is kind of tricky. I mean, is my experience from being a youth pastor, always work more just in metaphors, simple metaphors. And I think this, you know, that's a lot of how Jesus did with his parables too, is that, you know, even the most mundane things of life can correlate to truths about reality that can be meaningful. So, you know, it may be harder to find that specific kind of gospel connection, like with the peace child thing, but you know, there's got to be some sort of a starting point, you know. And so I try to do that a little bit. I try to kind of dumb down some of this stuff, because I just feel like pretentious if I start using
but you don't,
all the words.
You don't need to dumb it down, but what you need to do is to find a way to talk, which then inspires them to learn more. That's what Jordan Peterson was so good at doing.
Right. Dumbing down is not really
right. But I understand why you said that, to make it, to simplify. But the problem is we live in a society where things have been dumbed down to death. And I'm just finishing up a video on old fairy tales, and it's basically, the concept is that old fairy tales were not cute ever, and the reason I'm pointing that out is because a lot of people have the Disney idea of a fairy tale in their head, or, you know, in the Christian circles, the Veggie Tale idea of the gospel. In other words, they have these weird, cute, strange little things telling you something, and there's something radically wrong with that, and especially if you compare it to these old fairy tales. They're dark. They're teaching lessons too. They're preparing you for a world which is morally complex. And they're showing you that there is a light you can follow. And they often talk very openly about God. But, you know, where we are now, story is always a good way, you know, to enter into a conversation. A story about this, about that. And you don't even have to, what I've learned over my life is you don't even have to put any specific gospel message or try to convert anyone, as much as you just give them what you know honestly. And in fact, sometimes you need to make people say, well, where did you learn that? Because if you just tell them, you need to, sometimes what I do is just put something in someone like the picador, puts the little thing that makes the bull bleed, which kind of makes the bull go like, it's bullfighting. It's not much to talk about. But the point is that sometimes you just need to leave something in someone and have the patience and to trust that they have enough curiosity to ask where this is coming from. Why are you saying this?
Yeah.
And I think with children, it's different. And the difference, I think, comes with, especially when they're your own children. And I often see that the mother, we obviously know what the mother does. Mother gives birth to the child, the mother nurses the child, the mother spends the most time in education with the young child. But there is a big, dark, ugly world out there. And she is the least qualified, least suited person to introduce them to that world because she doesn't want to see them go into it. She wants to protect them. She always sees them as, no matter how old they are, they're always her babies. It's just like, no, I don't want you to go do this very dangerous thing, or even go to a college that has all sorts of weird challenges. So to me, it's up to the father to take the role of, okay, I've got to prepare you now for the world through your teen years or whatever, just to, not to make a rule, but just to give an idea. And I think that is part of the problem is that, well, for one thing, I think that so many places I've seen men have essentially abandoned. They don't know what to do. Feminism has either made them angry or made them stupid. Then there's all the entertainment there is. There's too much time with beer and porn and the game and all this other stuff that, men have been reduced to these creatures who just kind of sit around looking at things on television. And they go out and work and bring home money. But, there's a lot of women who are even resentful of that. Where I think that the role of the man still has to be something that's very unique to being a man. And that to me would be opening the door to the outside world. I think a lot of the reason why language is broken down and why you see, for instance, Christians giving up the fort, giving up their faith, is that they were never really introduced to the world. I mean, I often meet someone who say like, yeah, when I was young, I went to church and then somebody they knew died of a long death of cancer and I lost my faith. And my thought is always, did no one ever tell you life was difficult? Did no one ever tell you God doesn't just simply make things happen like a little gumball machine? You put quarter in and you get some gum out. Did no one ever tell you everything doesn't work out? And I think that is unfortunately the world we're living in. So then what happens is people get older and find out, my dad isn't perfect. My mom isn't perfect. They break the illusion of that entirely. My church isn't perfect. The people I know aren't perfect. The pastor isn't perfect. All these people have psychological issues. They all have moral issues. So they use that to keep them away from. But you see what it is they haven't been introduced to the more difficult questions.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've become very aware of, since becoming a father, that, that I feel is the biggest responsibility for sure, is that I cannot just give my children whatever they want, nor can I always protect them from everything, but I have to be the one to introduce them to challenge, difficulty, consequences, so that they can start to grow strong and be able to handle things when I'm not there for them. And I feel like there is such a tragedy that fatherlessness is so prevalent, but even more I feel is that how many young men have been lied to in believing that it's not something that they should seek and desire. And that's, and I mean, I always knew fatherhood was a big responsibility. And I think maybe, everything worked out in the Lord's time. It's fine, but I definitely wasn't taught by many people just, like what a important calling that is to be a father, and what a responsibility is. But only things with great responsibility have truly great rewards. There's no reward for things that are if it's fun and easy, that's its own reward. You got the reward of it. But it's very important. I do have an idea that this just something I've been thinking about for the past couple weeks.
Yeah.
And this is kind of, because I was thinking about what's my plan. Do I want to? I kind of decided I didn't think I wanted to go work for a church again necessarily. Just kind of I like being able to just volunteer and not have the mixing employment with ministry. It was a little bit of a that if you want to watch my talk with Paul Vanderclay, you could hear more about how I got at that point. But I was thinking I do feel called to do things, and the YouTube thing's maybe a little bit part of it, but I had an idea for something that I want to try to make happen in the real world. One thing I'd really enjoyed was I did a discipleship kind of thing, an internship after high school, and they had a pretty good model, with trying to get the older students to directly, they would assign people, so you had a certain amount of time to kind of mentor and pour into them, but it was all just based out of a mega church, and nobody ended up with much useful vocational skills or life skills at the end of it. And I went to Bible college as well for a while. That was good because I learned better study habits, but that had none of that aspect. And I was a little bit older. I tried to help some of the young guys that I saw there, but there's just some people go to colleges, they just flounder. They don't know what they're doing. Even at a Christian college can't do the work for you if you don't have a guide. But now, and I've been doing this. I've been working in carpentry for a long time, and now I'm in a position where I'm training guys. I'm training young guys, and even in that, I find that there's so much connection between the actual doing the work and these spiritual concepts. And so I kind of had an idea that I want to start some sort of an after high school kind of program or something that has that spiritual thing, but is also centered on learning trades, because guys aren't going to college as much.
Right.
And if they are, they don't know what they want to do. And so they end up living in their parents' basement. If they get a job, it's not skilled or anything. They're just working retail or whatever. And I think that, there's kind of this thing of that men need an adventure. Jordan Peterson talks about that kind of thing, talking about that guy standing on the corner holding the pink shopping bag, and if somebody gave him the opportunity to go have an adventure, he would. Well, I think that it's a little bit more mundane, but the skill of learning how to work with your hands and build actual things it's kind of necessary, and I think that part of the spiritual strength that people had long ago is that they had to do all that stuff, and they would, maybe they would think of that stuff maybe not as inherently spiritual, but I think that it is. And I think that that's it's because it's in the connection. It's connecting what you do with your body, with your hands, to these spiritual lessons.
Right. You're absolutely right. And one of the problems we have right now, and I think this is specifically a kind of problem that younger men have, is all of this stuff is abstract. It is
Yeah.
not part of the real world. I mean, I'm appreciating this conversation. I appreciate my interactions with people through the internet. But one of the reasons we got together in Germany, Paul and I and the other people with the Bridges of Meaning Festival in Landau earlier in August, was that let's try to make this more real. You know, to actually put human flesh to our conversations. And it's not just conversations that need to be made real, but the point of living has to be made tangible. You have to have something that you're holding on to. Yeah, you can write, but the writing isn't any good unless it turns into a book that someone's holding in their hands. That is to say, or in some way is getting through to the real person and affecting them. And there's nothing, I mean, when I look at the state of, for instance, housing these days, I just see in America, stuff just seems to like blow up and suddenly it's there. You got a frame, you put some sheetrock and, you know, do something to the walls, put some mud here, get a paint and boop, it's practically builds itself. And I think what we need to learn is the value of well-made things. And so it's like a double challenge. One is a challenge for you to teach younger people, younger men, but girls too, how to use hammers and saws and how to basically have some competence with construction. But on the other side, and this is your adventure, you need to spend more time researching housing construction and what kind of techniques would be best suited to where we're going. And we don't know where we're going, but nevertheless, we know we aren't going to, for instance, one of the things I have this, you may notice a bookshelf over here. What am I doing? Can't find it. It's in reverse. There's a bookshelf right there. And I just built that. But the wood on it was super expensive. And it's just pine. And, you know, we're moving into a world where these things are becoming wood is becoming more expensive, much more expensive. Now in America, we still have a good, you know, pile of wood, so it's not super expensive, but nevertheless, to think about things like what are the best materials to use? What, you know, how, you know, we make so many houses in America where we take all this pine, make frames out of it, and then come along 40 years later and knock the thing down and put something else there. Whereas in Switzerland, I remember when I was there, I would go back at different years, and there was one place that some friends of mine let me stay in, a little mini chalet that was actually a kind of a sausage and cheese curing hut. And this thing had been there for 400 years, 500 years, 450. And to me, as a Christian, I'm saying that's what I need to build. I need to build the thing that will last, because it's not just a question of following the Ten Commandments. It's also a question of building a world that respects the relationship that God has given us with everything. And so many materials now that we use or are forced to use, I mean, I went to a large furniture warehouse with multiple vendors here, very large, size of about 2 football fields. And I had trouble finding anything that was made out of real wood. Yeah. And I like real wood, but I don't like whatever this plastic junk that's being molded into wood is, you know, you know, this strange stuff. So it's doing research on materials, doing research on your side on techniques, doing research for one of the interesting things for me is when I lived in Alaska for 22 years, people were often building their own houses. Now, some of them were built rather cheaply, but a lot of them were built with a lot of care, you know, and people would do timber framed houses and stuff like this. And I looked at that and I go like, oh, that's pretty nice. You know, it's done with a quality to it. And I think that's, to me, that's just as much a part of my Christian outlook as, you know, not hurting and not killing people is. You know, that is to say that whatever the Ten Commandments are, there's also that God wants us to care for the world. And so part of caring for the world is to create a world you actually want to live in. And one of the
Yeah.
problems with pollution and such, I mean, people often get in this whole, what's causing climate change? And to which I'm saying, like, well, it really doesn't matter. What matters is you shouldn't live like a pig. You should, and in fact, pigs often live better than you do. You should live with some respect in the home you are. You should, Jordan Peterson at one point talks about, you need to, once you cleaned your room, you need to go on and make it beautiful. He says, and beauty scares people. Even when you're making a room better, it scares people because they'll want to say, oh, you can do this so much quicker, So that's my suggestion for you, is to teach kids. That's a great thing to do, but also to improve your skills and get a vision of construction, which is something we obviously need, but in such a way, that you feel like there's something of your own calling within it that's more than just simply the assemblage of some flat building or something, but whereas what you're making has beauty to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the thing that because like right now, I work, it's ridiculous the pace of the construction markets here, but it is, the quality is not the best a lot of times, and it's frustrating because I mean I want, because I know how to do most of the stuff the best way, but sometimes there's a sort of balance, I think, too, between like and I do appreciate like a beautiful aesthetic and things like that. I like to build furniture, and that that's something I think you need to really take your time for. But then there's also kind of there's this kind of tripod of making things. You have time, you have money, and you have quality, and you can always have two, but not the third, or to a certain degree, So
Right.
you can have it good and cheap, but it's going to cost a lot. You can have it good and or it's going to take a long time, I should say. You can have it good and quick, but it'll cost a lot. Or you can have it quick and fast, but it's not going to be good. So,
right. No, and I understand your situation in San Antonio. It's one of the fastest growing cities in America, and you have all these people coming to Texas because they're trying to get out of places like California. So naturally, you have to do that, and you have to support your family, and there's a lot of work. And I guess what I'm talking about is something to shoot for down the road, something to help you with that triangle.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'd say though, I mean, this is another kind of thing that I talked to somebody about this a little bit. Part of my thinking in this model was it's not an accident that Jesus is a carpenter and that his disciples are fishermen and other they're not the academic elite. And then even Paul, who is an academic, he's a tent maker. And the thing that I thought was really interesting about being a tent maker is that a tent is a temporary structure that it has that essence of we have to do something to take care of the now because we need a roof over our head, but this isn't the final thing, and it's looking forward to something better. And so that's I think that's the kind of the balance of that, because there's a wisdom in knowing like you could always do the best, most amazing job on everything, but that's kind of a waste of time for a lot of stuff. If it can be, so it's knowing what the best amount of time to spend on things is.
I just lost your sound.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. It was back.
I hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So
well, it's a difficulty. For instance, here in Tbilisi, they're building straight up. It's all cement, a cement and then some kind of cinder block that they build the stages, then they put cinder blocks, then they put some sort of mud on the outside, and maybe If they get lucky, they'll put something. But you look at the newer buildings being built, and they're just being built quickly so that people make money.
Mhm.
And they're not being made well. Now, of course,
Yeah.
one of the problems in this area is they occasionally get big earthquakes, and those buildings aren't going to do anything. So it's a question, it's a question of, you know, like I say, I think we have to shoot for the best we can do.
Yeah.
And now, obviously there are priorities. So feeding your family is a priority. Doing the work that's there is a priority. But how will you feel in 20 years if that's all you do? It's kind of like, I often say that about time and the way we live in time is that if you do the same thing over and over and over, like work in a factory or something like that, or work in an office, some repetitious functions, you lose your sense of time because you can't remember any of it. So to me, it seems like the goal in living when it comes to work, and maybe I need to make a video on this more, but is that work has to be meaningful.
Mhm.
And our society pushes us towards the money and the speed, the time, to make it as quick as possible. But and what is the answer? How does one do those three things without losing one of them? The time and the money and the quality. And I think one of the things we have to work on, besides whatever's happening in the big world, is we need to think about those kinds of things and ask serious questions about what do we do? We don't have the answer. I don't see an answer here. I don't see an answer there. And I know, there in America, you go straight out that way most of the time. Here, you go up because, and of course you have corrupt contractors here who will say, yeah, we're building 7 stories, and they build 10.
Yeah.
You make more money.
Yeah. I guess I would say, like, I think, yes, it does have to be meaningful, but I think that's kind of what I've learned, and that what I want to share with others is what we think will be meaningful is not what makes it meaningful. Because it's something with the knowledge that you're doing it for God and that this is your purpose.
No, I disagree, and here's why.
Well,
I think that the thing itself has to be made meaningful. That is to
well,
say,
I think that it is made meaningful when you understand that, like, I'm not saying that bad quality or anything like that, because I would say from my own experience, I have to do an awful lot of, like, fairly mundane things about things that people never think about,
right.
But if I'm, but it can become a meaningful experience because of what I am learning in doing it.
Oh yeah.
And that I'm participating in, like, I am working with the Lord in doing that. And
yeah, well,
I think that
you have a personal meaning that you derive from it, and that is for sure. And that God could teach you through that, no doubt about that whatsoever. But ultimately, I think we have to make sure that the things we make ourselves are worth making. And that's where the problem is, because our society, for instance, what is the point of getting a smartphone every 5 years, a new one? What is, I'm just simply saying, what is the point of that? What is the point of I remember walking into a lawyer's house in New York City. I was doing house painting, and every kid in that family, this was like around 1986, each one had a personal laptop, each one had a television, each one had there was something else they had that was kind of fancy. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's not the point. But also having these things, they're impersonal things. And if we are to take care of things in the world, we have to understand the difference between an impersonal thing and a personal thing. or as this guy Christopher Alexander talks about, he's an architect, very interesting guy from a Catholic background. He says, we have to make living architecture and living spaces for that architecture. And what we've done in architecture is created dead spaces. So if you go to the center of any town, USA, any big city, you're going to find a lot of dead buildings that are made out of glass and steel. And while somebody had to work on those and make money, and I don't begrudge that at all, somebody else should really take the time to figure out how to do this better, because we are killing ourselves in terms of our own approach to life by building a world that's just screens, that's just dead building space, that's just, places for highways. And we need, in order to, people talk about, yeah, we need the ecology and stuff. I said, you know what? If you don't know how to even take care of a house, if you don't know how to take care of your backyard garden, you're not going to really care for the environment. You're just going to do a lot of virtue signaling, and nothing will be accomplished except maybe some social contagion hysteria, which is what I think we're going to be facing on this kind of stuff. Whereas meanwhile, I think God gave us the world to improve and to make as good as possible. So my recommendation is simply, you are where you are, but where are you going? And how do you make it more meaningful for you?
Well, yeah, I think that, I guess, because there is so much talk about this sort of thing. And I think it's, one of the reasons that a lot of people are being more attracted to the more traditional forms of Christianity and such things, as the art and the cathedrals and this, because that, does capture a sort of an idealized thing. But I think that, the problem is that the belief that building a cathedral is meaningful keeps a lot of people from building something lesser. And there's kind of like, I think, a positive feedback cycle where in your doing things helps you learn about the Lord, understand his role, how you fit into it, what your purpose is for his plans, and then that will improve the work, and then that'll improve your understanding of your place in the world, and it grows. So I mean, that's why, because I'm more concerned about people than things at the end of the day. I think that,
no, you're right, people are more important than things, but we also have to remember the world that people grow up in, the world that we live in, and that has an effect upon us. We've only got 2 more minutes here, and it's going to shut down, and I don't want to do this one again. So we can talk some other time. Obviously, there's much more to talk about. And I've appreciated talking with you. And there's a lot. Do you have any last thing to say? We got about 1.5 minutes.
Well, people should buy old tools. That'll help. That'll inspire you to build something nice.
Very good.
A high quality antique.
Yeah, because many of those old tools also still work.
Yeah, they work better.
Yeah. Well, that's a good recommendation. Okay, Mike, it was good meeting you. And
very nice.
I'll put this up in a week or 2. I've got some other stuff going up this weekend, but it'll be out there soon. And I'll let you know on Facebook when I'm putting it up.
All right, sounds great.
Take care. Nice have a good day out there in Texas. And I'll have a good day here. See ya.
Okay, well, thanks for hanging out with us and joining in on the conversation. If you want to add anything, like I said, do leave a comment below. And remember, Anadromous means swimming against the stream. And that's what I'm inviting you to do on this channel. You don't have to agree with me, but don't float downstream with the rest of the propaganda debris. Swim against it. Prove that you're alive. And as the Georgians say, droabit, which means literally temporarily.
we'll just be gone from each other a while, and then we will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.